Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Getting Started with Apex. And this time we are going to talk about collections, the lists, the sets, and maps, and how we use them in our Apex programming. If you've come from another programming background, JavaScript, these are your arrays. Java, right, your hash maps, tree maps, arrays, array lists, etc. In Apex, we have three. And they are the list, the set, and the map. They have a lot of very useful features that are built in as part of the programming language. And the best way to understand all of these is they are ways to work with multiple data types. If we go back to our last video, right, on primitives, right, and variables. If we declare a variable of type integer, it can hold one integer, the number 7. If we create a list of integers, we could hold 1,000,000 integers. So obviously, right, when you were trying to work, particularly in Salesforce programming, you can see where, if you want to work with all the leads that were created last week, right, these are things that are going to go into collections. So you can store them in one data type and work with them. So that said, let's, no further ado, let's go back to IntelliJ and Illuminated Cloud and start talking about them. So I've already created a class for us, an Apex Collections class with 3 methods: Apex lists, sets, and maps, and some comments just to highlight some of the real key features of each one. And we're going to talk about them briefly and hit on some of the key things and how we work with them in Apex programming. The first one we're going to discuss is the list. And a list is an ordered collection of values, and a duplicate values are allowed. So if we wanted to have the same account, the same integer, the same contact or string, we could put that in a list as many times as we want. They are ordered, which means we can sort them and that we can access values at certain positions. And also items in lists remain in the position that you added them in. So the first thing you added to a list will stay in the first position unless you later on deliberately decide to move it. And we're going to see how all this can be useful. But the first thing we need to talk about is just how do we actually create a list? So we have to start with the list keyword, and a list, and it all is going to be followed by angle braces like that, right? And then because Apex is a statically typed language, we have to say what sort of data type is this list going to hold? What's it a collection of? So for this, we're just going to say it's a list of integers. And then we have to give it a name. We'll call it our integer list. And then we have to set it equal to something. Now we need to use the new keyword because we are working with the list class. And it's a new list of integers. And that is your basic syntax to create a list in Apex. If we want to, but right now we have an empty list, meaning that it's there, but it doesn't reference any values. We haven't put anything in it. So, which isn't particularly useful. So just to show what this, let's just add a couple numbers to our integer list. So integer list, and then we're going to use dot notation to access the built-in methods that are features of this class in the language. And one of them is the .add method. So we're just going to add the number 1 to our list. Now let's do that a couple more times. I'm going to print that out, and then we'll just say we're going to add number 3. Oops, get rid of that. And the number 78. And the number 100. And we're going to add a negative number in. That negative 101. And we'll do one more because let's put a duplicate value in here just to do that. All right, so now we have a list that contains 6 values. If we were to call the size method on this, so we'll do system.debug. We're going to print this to the debug log. Integer list dot size. That should give us back a value of 6. That's how many items are in our list. And let's just so again, we'll just print to the debug log the actual contents of the list. So we're just going to do the integer list. And we're going to compile this. And we're going to run it from our anonymous Apex, Apex collections.apex lists. I'm going to hit it. And we can see, yes, okay, it does. It contains 6 values, and they are the 6 values that we just put in there. But now what happens if we want to access a value at a certain position? What if we want to get the first item in the list? How do we do that? So lists use, and this is true of most of all computer programming I know of, you're going to use zero-based indexing to access the values in a certain spot in your collection. So what that means, if we want to get item number 1, the number 1, it's actually at position 0. And item number 6, our last item, is actually at position 5. This can take some time to get used to. I compare it to back when I was in the military, right? And learning military time. After a pretty short period of time, you don't even think about it, and your mind converts, the 12-hour clock to the 24-hour clock instantly. In a little while, your mind will instantly convert positions using zero-based indexing. Just takes a little bit of getting used to. So, in fact, we want to wrap each of these in a system.debug, just to double check our results. Get rid of that. And then, all right. Compile that again. And open up our anonymous Apex, rerun. And there we go. You can see that is what got us the values 1 and 78. There's a lot of great things you could do with lists. And in the interest of keeping these videos relatively short, what I really want to encourage you to do is take some time and go read the documentation. So here would be the Apex Developer's Guide for the list class. And this would give us all of the methods that are built in, that are part of the Apex language, is empty, sort, toString, so many very useful things that will save you a lot of problem solving, trying to figure out how to do something because it's already been implemented in the language for you. So almost anytime you have a question, the first place you should go for anything is go take a look at the documentation and read, find out there's some methods in here that you'll use every day, and there's some that you won't use very often. Deep clone is a good example, but it's very useful to familiarize yourself with all of the classes that are built in as features of the Apex language. We'll go back to IntelliJ. So the last thing I want to show you with lists is a really common error when working with really any sort of array, any sort of collection. So a lot of times what we need to do as programmers is get the last element in our list. And this is a little harder to do, right? So if we have a list and it's not empty, there is going to be something at position 0. But we don't know what's going to be we don't know where the last position is going to be. If we are running something that's going to look at every lead that was created this week, or all of custom data, there's a million possible scenarios here. We're not going to know if this list has 10 items, 1,000, or 1,000,000. So what we need to do is to kind of dynamically get to that last place in the list. And we're going to call get, and then what I want to do is I'm going to assign this to a new integer. Integer list dot get, and then we have to tell the get method the position that we want to go to. So if you remember earlier, we used the size method. So if we say integer list dot size, that is reliably going to give us the count of the last item in our list. And I'm going to compile this And I'm going to run it, and it's going to throw an error. And it's an error I want you to see because it's a really, really common one when we're working with lists. And it's worth understanding and how do we fix it. So let's just run our anonymous Apex. List index out of bounds 6. All right, so list index out of bounds. What that means, we've talked, there's our indexes. We have 0 and we have 5. And for this list, those are the valid first and last indexes. Everything else is your position 1, 2, 3, and 4. But because we passed in size, which is just giving us the count, that there are 6 items in this list, it went to look for index 6, which does not exist. So that's the computer's way of telling you, hey, you gave us an index that when we went to look for it in memory doesn't exist. It doesn't reference a valid location. So for this one, it's pretty simple. All we really have to do is call -1. And we know then, because we're using zero-based indexing, we're going to get back integer list.size is going to equal 6. We subtract 1 from it. And last place should reliably give us back the number 78. Anonymous Apex, run it. And there you can see, yes, indeed. So that's the list. Real quick introduction to lists and how we work with them. So I am going to minimize this one, and we're going to talk about sets. Sets are a different type of collection. They are unordered, and they automatically remove duplicates. So if we take a list that contains duplicates and put it into a set, it will automatically handle deduping for us. So you can see this is particularly useful if you want to get a count of unique values, and especially if you want to make sure that the same S-object record is not in a collection more than once, because if that record ID, which is always a unique value, cannot be in your set more than one time. But sets are also unordered. So we can never access a set at position 0. We can never sort a set. So those are the things to consider when we're using them. To declare a set, just like we did earlier, we start with the keyword set. Same thing. We have to declare what type of data is this going to hold. Integer set. And just like we did before, it's equal to a new set of integers. So really syntactically, very much like working with a list, and most of the methods are the same as well. You are just now using, it's unordered and dedupes for you, and you use the set keyword. So to show you that, I am going to, let's just say, so we're going to add values the same way. So integer set dot add 1. Do a few of these. Leave 1. We're going to have 1 3 times. 78. And 78. All right. So if this was a list, right, we would get back 5 values. But because it's a set, if we call the size method on it, and has a size method just like our list, we should get back the number 2. And let's do that. Let's also just print the contents of our set to the debug log. Compile. Going a little slow. Anonymous Apex, and we're going to take off our lists and work with our Apex sets. And there you go. It contains 2. And even though you saw we called the add method on the set 5 times, it only contains 2 items. It automatically removed all of the duplicate values for us. But if we try to say, hey, I want to know what's at position 0. Whoop. That's inside the square brackets. And that shouldn't even compile for it, but if it does, it'll throw an error at us when we try to run. Yeah, it did not see what I. Yeah, so we can't even compile that because it's a set, and because sets are not ordered, there's no guarantee that values are at the same spot every time. So we can't say give us the value at position 0. Sets don't work that way. The nice thing about sets also is if you pass in, if you could add, if I took that list of integers we created in our previous method, pass that into the set, it would automatically dedupe that for us. So this is a great way to, and probably the best built-in way, just to get counts of unique values. Sets are another really valuable tool that you're going to use all the time in your Apex programming. Last, and the hardest to understand, is the map. Maps are key value pairs, and they can be of any data type. And this is important to understand, is any data type. When I was new and learning how to code in Apex, I really struggled with maps. And one of the things that I really struggled with is because I didn't understand that any data type meant anything that we just talked about in our primitives. S objects, user-defined data types, strings. So in my mind, a map could only be, an integer and a string, string and a decimal, etc. But what is really common with maps is actually, and probably the most common one you'll use in your day-to-day Apex programming, is going to be a set and then some sort of an S object. So I'm going to show you sort of what that looks like. So just like we've seen before, to declare a map, we use the map keyword. And just like before, we need our angle braces. And then we have to say what sort of values, what are our key value, so key value pair is going to be. So for the for this first simple one, let's just do a key value pair of integer and string. We're going to call this strings by integers. New map. So just like we had before, we have an empty map. If we wanted to put a couple values into this, we would do something like strings by integers dot put. And this is before we were using add. Maps are going to use dot put. So let's say 1 is hello, and strings by integers dot put two is goodbye. All right, so real quickly, we're going to run debug log, and let's just see, we're just going to look at the contents of our map. Bring that up to the center a little bit. Anonymous Apex again. Apex maps. And you can see we've got 1, hello, 2, goodbye. Those are the contents of our map. Now, if we wanted to get a value at a certain location, we could do something like strings by integers get. And get is what we have to do for get is give it the key. And the first value in your map is the key. So if we want number 2, we're going to put that into a debug log. That is going to give us what the value is, because remember, it's a key value pair. So we said, get us the value that corresponds with the key 2. So again, we'll compile that, open up our anonymous Apex, and now we just got back the value goodbye. A couple other important built-in methods to understand with system.debug with our map is if we want to just know what are all our keys, key set. And values will give us, I'm going to delete these two. And that should give us the numbers 1 and 2 and hello and goodbye. There you go. Now, a really, really common way to use maps, and I'm going to show you I certainly don't want to call it a secret, but a useful technique to know that is that you can do a query in the map constructor that will then return, for S object types, it will return a set of if you create a map of ID and an S object, you can build a SOQL query in your constructor that will return a value that corresponds to that. So let's just real quickly, let's just say map ID and contact. I'm going to call that contacts by IDs. And that's the ID helps, but that's a good practice, I think, with maps is your values by the key for them. That's going to equal a new map. And in here, inside our constructor, we could do select ID first name from contact limit 10. Close that off. And we are just going to do system.debug contact by IDs. See what our results are. Run that. And there you go. We can see we've got a list of IDs and first names for our map of contacts by IDs. Now, where maps really shine, and this is probably worth doing its own video, is comparing values. So if you had a list of contacts and you wanted to compare them to a list of campaign members, or a really common one is when you want to compare the data from trigger.new against trigger.old and see if a certain field has changed, right? I want to look at my accounts that are coming into my trigger and look and see if a certain field value has changed. If it has changed, then I want to do this thing with them. If it has not changed, then just ignore it. We're going to move on. And that's a really common design pattern to implement in your trigger handlers. And we'll do another video to talk about that. I just wanted this to be a very quick introduction to your list sets and maps and how you can use them in Apex programming. So I hope this was useful. If it was, please click on like and hit that subscribe button. If you have any questions, let me know in comments or, find me on LinkedIn or Twitter, etc. And more than happy to talk about it. So take care until next time, everybody, and keep on coding.